Welcome back to Just a Dude podcast, where we dive into the lives, minds, and stories of extraordinary people. I'm your host, Nathan, and today we're tackling something that resonates with each and every one of us. How to face life's toughest challenges, not just with strength, but with the right mindset. We're talking about cultivating a warrior spirit in the modern world, and I couldn't think of a better guide for this journey than our guest today. So buckle up, because this episode is all about mental fortitude, resilience, and the warrior mindset. Let's get into it. Today we have the honor of hosting Mark from the Pearl Snap Tactical Podcast. He's a true embodiment of the warrior ethos. Mark has shared his insights through his blog, where he discusses preparing for hard times with a warrior mindset. Mark is a former infantryman, intelligence professional, and a licensed attorney who has conducted intelligence and security operations around the globe. He has trained units from the Department of Defense, the Department of Justice, Fortune 500 companies, and police officers from over 60 departments around the country. He's a contributor to the Counterterrorist magazine and the host of the Pearl Snap Tactical Podcast. Mark, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us today to share your journey and your strategies for mental resilience.
Hey, Nathan, thanks for having me on. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm so glad to have you here, and we're going to talk about the warrior mindset, which is something that's definitely coming up nowadays, especially in the media with the changes that are going on in the military. So can you explain to the guests a little bit, just a general understanding of what the warrior mindset is?
Yeah, I mean, it's like anything, those words get warrior mindset, put them together, warrior mindset. I mean, that stuff gets batted around quite a bit in different, whether it's in business, sports, the military, or just kind of everyday life. So I guess depending on your context, it could be a little different, but I'll tell you what it means to me. It's just, at least what we do, like with our podcast and our training company is, we're on, I guess our mission is to revalorize kind of the ancient concepts of what it meant to be a warrior. There was a time and age where everyone had some faculty, right? Or with the warrior arts, just for protecting their village and protecting their family. And then through modernity, a lot of that has atrophied and we don't really have it. We've kind of seen it as something that's not as necessary anymore. But I think we're moving into a new age. If you've looked through any news feed, that these things are, society really, it is coming apart. Things are kind of, everything's up for grabs now. And not that we're creating militias or units or anything like that, but just that you as an individual I think we can't go back and live like Vikings or samurai or, those right. Ancient warrior cultures. It's not that we want to live like that, but we would like to pull some of their wisdom and maybe their outlook on handling challenges in our life in the spirit of the way they did. I mean, you're not going to take an axe to someone you have a disagreement with, but
Exactly.
We're not going to do that. You shouldn't do that, right? But I think there's a lot of value in resurrecting the mindset. And so, yes, like what does that mean? Well, that like the ancient Greeks had this concept of arete, right? Which is just the the pursuit of excellence and in anything that you do, and so we do live in a society that really praises mediocrity,
Yeah, it really does. If you think about it, everything we've done, I mean, I see kids after me growing up, participation trophies and all that. When I was a kid, there was no participation trophy. You were either first or, as Ricky Bobby says, you're last.
First, you're last.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, and so, so it's really kind of that. So that's one aspect of it is, right? It's just I hate to say pursuit of excellence, but it really is. But it's an all-encompassing pursuit of excellence. Is in everything you do. And it's really, they saw it as every bit as much of a spiritual pursuit as a physical one, right? There's a really metaphysical component behind that too. And we can get into that too if you want to. But that would be one set that if you look at these ancient warrior cultures, that was always something that was at the forefront, that they wanted to be the very best. And so they're in their peer group, and it's wanting to be the best on the battlefield. It was wanted to be the best in the hall, the best leader and the best father, the family man, because your family line was just as very much important for you, because your descendants, right? And some of these cultures was in a way that they believed that they lived on in their descendants. And so having their children healthy and infused with these values. And also as a matter of survival, right? Because there wasn't a government apparatus to
Yes.
protect your children, so they wanted to make sure that they had family lines that were very strong, and so kind of pulling that. And then I think also with the mindset part of it is just understanding that whatever it is that you're wanting to go for, that there's going to be a struggle involved. And there's an ancient Greek philosopher who's one of my favorite guys, but Heraclitus, who said, and I'm going to paraphrase this, but he said that war is the father of all things. And I wholeheartedly agree with that war is the father of all things. And I don't necessarily mean kinetic war, like we're sword fighting and stuff. But if you look at nature, right, struggle is very much part of nature. From if you take a little chick that's trying to hatch out of the egg, its first encounter with life and self-awareness starts with trying to break out of that shell. Or you see the footage of like the little deer, the fawn that's being birthed, and it's lands on the ground and it's only got a few minutes to get its legs, and you see how it's struggling to get up. But it's just whatever, as you do pursue that excellence, you have to understand that struggle and pain and hardship is inextricably linked with achievement. And we're in a society that is very soft and is risk averse. We have an over obsession with comfort and safety. And that really, and look, I want to be safe. I want my kids to be safe. But I mean, in the context of comfort is really, in a sense, the warrior's enemy, and that's why, where we get that concept or that phrase, if we look at our home, if it looks kind of plain or austere, we say, well, it's very Spartan-like. Well, the Spartans understood that they wanted their people to be strong. And they knew that if these guys were just obsessed with sleeping on feather beds and drinking out of gold, goblets and stuff like that, and surrounded constantly by luxury, that has a decaying effect on your soul. And I'm not saying that I don't like nice things, or
sure, we all
want
do.
to drive a good truck, but I don't want those things to become traps for me. The warrior mindset, I don't think it's just a way of thinking. I think it's a way of living. And that in a nutshell is for me, that's I think is really why we're here on this earth, is to grow and expand our consciousness, in a sense, not to get new agey, because I'm not a new age guy, but
right.
but I think nature is my teacher. And when I look at nature, if you look at everything from the cellular level to Homo sapiens, right, the whole idea of life is growing and becoming, evolving and becoming stronger, and I really do think that is our purpose in life. And I don't mean that in a consumerist kind of like get all the toys you can and, just acquire wealth for the sake of wealth. I don't mean it in that stand, but I mean, as far as growing as a person through experiences. And oftentimes, if you're on the warrior path, that would be to subject yourself to experiences that are uncomfortable, that are challenging, that are hard, but understanding that is your teacher, that is your instructor, and that is what is your catalyst for growth and for a fulfilling life, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's great. And that kind of takes us into the next part, because if we're going to have that sort of mindset, we have to have mental preparation, right?
Yeah.
Mental toughness. And, how is mental preparation crucial, for us in a warrior mindset?
Yeah, well, the mental game is so important. I don't know anyone I don't care what their profession is, that's on the top of their game or accomplished, that doesn't guard their mind, that doesn't, I guess what I would say, mental diet. I mean, that sounds kind of like a weird kind of term, but I've heard
Sure.
that, floated around. But I think it just like we take food and water, sustenance into our body to grow, to strengthen it. I find people pay more attention to that and very little attention to what goes into their mind, to the things that they look at, to the things that they read, to the things that they watch, and that, there's things that you can read, there's things that you can watch that can strengthen your spirit. And then there's things that can corrupt it and
absolutely
cause atrophy. And not only that, the things that you take in, but then the things that you say to yourself, the stories that you tell yourself, the things that you repeat to yourself. And I think most of us just kind of go on autopilot and just allow our thoughts to just kind of run rampant without us taking control. Your mind is your most powerful tool, and yet very few of us take time to discipline it, to hone it, to strengthen it in the same way that we do our bodies in the gym. So I think that's one component of it. Going back to, I don't know anyone that has ever accomplished anything that was worthwhile that did it with a negative attitude, and negative self-talk. So I think having the right kind of self-talk and attitude, and that's hard, because that's something that it's always with us. Like, you go and do a gym session, you go work out, you really push yourself at the gym and you have a good workout session, and then you're done. You allow yourself rest, you allow yourself recovery. And with your thought life, it's not exactly the same, right? Because it's always there. It's always that negative aspect in your soul that's always, will tear you down if you don't take control of it. And so that's definitely, and it goes back, to the warrior mindset too. It's like you have to have that thought life that you're developing as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's just like your body, right? As you train your body, whether it just be regular working out for fitness, whatever, maybe even if you are a warrior, you're one of our, persons in our military, or, police officer, whatever it may be, it's so important to not only do that training for your body, but also for your mind. And really, the physical training goes hand in hand with the mental training, because you can't really have one without the other. I mean, you could train your mind, but everybody knows that if you're more physically fit, you're generally happier, you have less stress, and you're better prepared for any situation that comes up.
Right. I agree.
Yeah, so that kind of leads us to resilience, right? If we're talking about a warrior mindset and building the mind, we want to be definitely resilient. And I know you've done some blogs, haven't you, on resiliency?
Yeah, I've done some. I do have a blog. I don't really update it much. I kind of do most of it on the podcast. I guess
it's easier on the podcast, isn't it?
I'm better at running my mouth than running the pen, I guess. But yeah, so we have done some episodes on that. If you're on this path, and I really do call it a path, because I don't look at it as just like, oh, it's a thing I'm thinking about, or it's a part of my life. I mean, it really becomes your life. And so you don't have to be in the military or law enforcement or something like that to espouse these virtues, right? And to pursue these things, right? So it can help. I mean, I would say for me, that's where I learned some of these things, but you don't have to, especially, we're talking about these ancient values and virtues, right? So they're up for grabs for everybody. But yeah.
Because we definitely don't, we're not warriors in the sense like we used to be.
Right, exactly. And so, so it's for everybody, man, woman, whoever, wants to pursue this. So, so the resiliency thing, I mean, I think part of it is, life is struggle, right? Like I said, Heraclitus, war is the father of all things. So every endeavor, you're going to meet resistance, right? So if you want to pursue an advanced degree, like a PhD study, or if you want to become, a marathon runner, or what, or if you want to get promoted to be the best in your profession and rise up the ladder, whatever it is, you have to know on the outset that you're going to face resistance, right? There are other things in life, and it doesn't matter what it is. It could be a health setback. It could be a death in the family, or, someone else gets the promotion and you don't, it doesn't matter. It's success and growth is very rarely a straight line. It's more,
absolutely.
It's more like a zigzag.
It is. It is. Yeah. If you've lived more than 20 years on life, I think you'll figure that out really quick, that it's definitely it's ups and downs.
Yeah. And so I think what hamstrings a lot of people is, especially, we've got this hustle culture out there, right? That's just telling you, man, all you need to do is just, you just work harder, and you just do more, and you do more, and you do more. And really what happens is people just end up burning themselves out. They buy this person's product, and, they try to do these things, and they just end up burning themselves out. And they're like, well, that's not what it's supposed to be like. I thought if I did these things or said these things, or, that I was going to, I want that person's success. I want it to look like that. But what you don't see is the sleepless nights, the churning of the stomach, all of the disappointments and the letdowns and the failures, right? And
Hmm.
the setbacks that they experienced until they got all you see, when we look at
Is the
whoever,
success. Yep.
yeah, you see the end product, you don't see the journey. And so you kind of have to go with that with your eyes open to know that, man, that's the price of admission, man. Like if that's whatever that thing is that you're pursuing, you have to understand that the obstacle is the path, as they say, right? That is the path. The setbacks, the disappointments, those are part of the thing because. And really, it comes down to framing and how you look at those things. I've had several disappointments in my life, but I try and I'm not always successful, but I hope that I have become more successful with framing these things and seeing that, these setbacks are part of the things that are building my armor. They are building my resiliency. They are making me stronger. They are giving me more experiences so that when I do go through the next door, I've got more information and experience at command that I can use to my advantage. You know what I mean? So
Exactly.
I think, and that's what's so hard getting back to like what you said, how they're raising kids now with everyone gets a trophy, even just by showing up, you're already acknowledged and get the same type of, oh, you're so good. You did the minimum,
Yeah,
congratulations,
exactly.
you know, and,
Exactly.
I think that really hurts people. I think that's one of the problems in our society that we're having struggle with is that, yeah, just because you got out of high school and yeah, just because maybe you went to college and everything that, nobody, the world does not owe you anything.
No,
You have to
you have to
start.
earn it. Yeah.
Yeah, you really do. You have to start at the bottom, just like everyone else, and you have to swim your way up the stream and, navigate all the challenges and the things that are trying to eat you
Yeah.
on the way up, and that you understand that that's part of it. And I think once you start seeing that as that is a natural, it's really a law of nature, I think, and it's
Yeah.
a natural progression. And when you kind of see that, then all of a sudden you have less of a tendency to feel sorry for yourself or think the universe is out to get you or anything. And instead you see it as a vehicle for your becoming, for your growth, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
And Mark, I wanted to add on to that too, because I think, like you said, we have our struggles and our adversities, and then we have our good times too, that everything
yes,
seems to work out. But you're probably, I don't want to speak for you, but I know for myself, I learn more from the struggles and the setbacks than I do from the progressions, because I learned one way not to do something or, learned from that experience to make it better in the future. And I think that's a tough thing too, where we're in a society now where we want instant gratification. And just like you said earlier, looking at somebody, if you're talking, you're listening to somebody about self-help or improving yourself, you think, oh, if I do all these things right now, I'll be good right now. And the
yeah,
fact of the matter is it takes work. And
yes,
that's where the resiliency comes in.
yeah. And I'll say this, I mean, just kind of put myself on blast there, but building and cultivating your character it's so necessary so that when you are successful and you do have those success, you'll be able to handle it. And that, I think that's the one thing that nobody talks about. Like if you have not cultivated your character and your virtue and you do get that success, a lot of times it can be your undoing because you don't have the maturity to handle it. There are times in my life that I got exactly what I wanted and I wasn't ready for it and it destroyed me. Hey, I mean,
Yep.
absolutely
Careful
wrecked
what you wish
me.
for.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
And when I go back and I reflect on it, I'm like, yeah, because I had not, it's not that I cheated or got something.
Right.
It just the way the chips fell, that it seemed like it worked out in my favor. But the problem is because I hadn't done the work or had the experiences or had, the maturity, whatever it was for that situation, that I just wasn't able to handle it. And
Hmm.
it was my undoing, right? So that's why nobody wants to hurt. No one wants to experience pain and struggle. But the fact is that those are just it's the law of nature. You cannot escape it. So
It's just part of life. It's
yeah,
something that we cannot avoid no matter what we do. You can't be put in a box and shielded from everything.
yeah,
And if
Yeah.
you've had such a good life that you've never had a problem, by all means, contact me. Let me
Yeah.
know, because I would
Yeah.
love to meet you,
Yeah. Yeah.
But it is. And I think we get into this mindset that everything should be good and hunky dory and we need to just, everything should go our way, when in reality, that's number one, doesn't happen. And number two, we need those obstacles in our lives because that's what's going to challenge us and help us grow,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know? Because
I agree.
if we don't have obstacles, we don't have challenges, then and everything's just handed to us, we become, for lack of a better word, soft,
Mm-hmm.
and people will just take advantage of that and walk all over us.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Yeah.
that's another thing that you don't understand as well, is if you've never had any adversity in your life or any challenges, that people could take advantage of that too, because
Yes.
you may have never seen it.
Yeah. Yeah. So that even if you do reach the pinnacle of where you're wanting to go, you're not going to be able to maintain it because you
Exactly.
haven't had the building experiences necessary to equip you to maintain that or to grow from it, to grow it. You got and yeah, maybe there's an anomaly or an outlier out there, but it's not it's not the norm.
Yeah,
It's
it's
just not.
definitely the exception, not the
Yeah.
rule.
Yeah. Exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So obviously we talked about, personal growth and overcoming challenges. Can you give us a concept of what it feels like, or maybe how one can push themselves beyond their comfort zones? Because that's definitely part of the warrior mindset, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think for me, I think that you have to get with yourself, and sometimes people can be very it can be very disconcerting sometimes, and people are very uncomfortable with themselves. And if you don't believe this, just try going to the doctor's office and sitting in the waiting room for more than 5 minutes without pulling out your cell phone. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, people do not take time to reflect anymore, and I could be as guilty as anybody about it. But to really, you have to be able to answer these three questions, I think, ultimately, whenever you're setting out on some endeavor. And you have to decide, like, what is it that I want? Like, what do you want? Because there's oftentimes you see things that other people are doing and you're like, I want that. And it's like you're attracted to a certain aspect of it, but are you attracted to it just because you see them doing it and you think it's cool? Or is it being fed to you by society that
Hmm.
this thing will make you a better person, or this will make you a more attractive person, whatever it is,
Yep.
fill in the blank. And the danger is, if you don't understand what it is you want, then you run foul of trying to live someone else's life and not your own. And I think there's a lot of that going on in society. So it's really thinking about what you want. And a lot of people won't ask that question honestly of themselves, on the other hand, because they're afraid of what the answer is going to be.
Hmm.
Because when you find out what it is you want, obviously that's something you're lacking in your life. And so if you're going to pursue that, then that's going to entail some change. It may entail
Hmm.
you giving up certain things. It may, abandoning certain things that maybe aren't serving you or are not healthy for you or no longer really applicable to you at this stage in your life, and getting out of that comfort zone. People are afraid sometimes to do that. So therefore they won't ask the question because they're afraid of what the answer is. So that's one thing I think that's very important for you to settle with yourself. You got to get that right first, is to really understand what do you want. And then the component question is once you decide, and I kind of hit on that already, but
Hmm.
once you feel like you know what you want, you have to ask yourself, well, why do you want that? Why is that important to you? Is it important again? And it goes back to, well, is it just because I saw someone else doing it and I look up to them and I think that would be cool for me? Because maybe it wouldn't be, maybe it's just
Yeah.
something cool for that person, but maybe that's not really for me. So what do you want? And then why do you want that? That's every bit as critical. And then if you can successfully negotiate those two questions, and the third one, and this one's probably the hardest one, is, all right, I know what I want. I know why I want it. Now, what am I willing to do to get it? Like, you really have to count the cost before you set out on the journey, because it goes back to all the things we've already discussed. Because if you set out for something that you want, that's important to you, it's almost as if the universe conspires against you in a
It
sense
is.
to derail you. You will suffer setbacks. You will suffer. right? You will hurt, you will find disappointment on that journey. And if you haven't answered those first two questions, well, and really the third one too, of what you're
Yeah.
willing to do, right? Then you're going to be hamstrung and really going to be owned before you ever make it out the door in your pursuit of that, you know? But if you can answer, like, what am I willing to do to get it? What am I willing to give up? What am I willing to sacrifice? What am I willing to endure? How long am I willing to endure to get this? Well, man, once you do that, you're almost unstoppable, man, because that's what's going to keep you going when you get disoriented, when you're in your darkest hour. That's going to be a light, for you to guide you. When you're confused and you don't know which way to go, that's going to tell you what your next step is. And sometimes that's all you're going to know is what the next step is. But those three questions, once you get solid in your mind and an answer, that is enough. It has been in my experience to really propel you forward. When you don't do that, that's when you get halfway in the journey and you just find yourself out of gas and bitter and just, despondent almost and giving up.
Exactly. And Mark, I could tell you in my life, I've done a lot of this is what I want and this is what I'm willing to get there. But I quite often leave out the why part. And, now thinking back on some of the things where I was hell-bent on doing something and it just didn't go quite the way I wanted, I think it's because I didn't address the why. I think it's the fact that I was just like you said, oh, I see, Johnny over here that has, this or is doing that. And, oh, I think that would be fun. I mean, that might be my why, but I don't think that's enough of a why to keep you into it. You really need to know the reason that you're going to do something.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we all have heard those stories of guys or gals that, they give it all to go up the corporate ladder or whatever. They've devoted their whole essence to this and they, at the expense of their families and relationships. And then they get in their midlife and they got all of the things that they wanted. And now they look out and it's like a kingdom of ashes. They're looking down and they're like, what was this all for? And I think that's really because they were pursuing, in a sense, maybe someone else's dreams, or they didn't get off the ride when it was their stop, to transition to something else, I mean, and so really just taking the time to really soul search and to be in touch with yourself along the way and the journey, I think is every bit as important.
I agree with you. I think just those three questions, just framing those, what do you want? Why do you want it? What are you willing to do to get it? I think even just writing those down so that you can refer back to it would probably be a good help too. I mean, I'm not much of a writer, but as I get older, I see more and more value, probably because I can't remember anything anymore.
Yeah.
But, it's like I find myself writing stuff down and then I'm like, okay, why did I do this? Or what? Oh, okay, there's my notes. Now I can do that. And it's, especially if you're going to do a major life goal, that might not be a bad idea to write it down, put it somewhere where you can look at it, make sure your why stays consistent.
Yeah.
And your reason for it. Because at some point, you've probably done it the way that I have too, where you have a good, this is what I want. This is why I want it. It makes sense. This is what I'm willing to do. But then at some point that why changes, something changes in your life.
Yeah.
And instead of, you have to go back and reevaluate, is this still important to me?
Yeah. Yeah. Because you will, self-doubt is something that plagues us all. And that's part of the process too. So there will be doubts and you'll be like, hey man, is this really what I signed up for? Because you really won't know, it's just like taking a punch, right? Until you've taken a punch, you don't really know what that feels like. You can visualize it, you can read about it, but until you take it right, you really don't know what that's like. But, those are also, I think when you really have answered those questions, then you'll know, hey, is this still right for me? Or maybe it's not. And that's okay. There's no fault in, dipping your foot in the water and saying, maybe this isn't for me. Right. But if you abandon it prematurely, then you always got that nagging doubt. So I think on the front end, if you address these honestly and, and it may take some time to really come to these answers, but I think once you do as best you can and honestly, right, I think that makes all the difference on when you do encounter those kind of soul searching times along the way. You'll have the answer that you need.
I think the upfront work really makes the difference, especially when you're making huge life decisions, because you don't want to go into things willy-nilly and like we said, we might have a why, but we should really make sure that why is solid and the reason, what we want to do is solid and our plan for how to get it. And maybe even look at, I'm just throwing this out there as an anecdote, but looking at what the outcome looks like to us and say, this is what I want. This is why I want it. This is what I'm going to do to get it. But once I get it, what does it look like?
Yeah.
And that might give us an opportunity to say and change that plan around the way, because your willingness to do it might change. Maybe you need to do more classes, or maybe you need to read more, or do, whatever. But, I've found in my life situation, and sorry if I'm getting off topic, but it seems to help if you know what you want the outcome to be, it's easier to make that outcome.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, defining what success looks like for you.
Exactly.
Right?
Because success for me and you is different.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think that's a good point too. Yeah, for sure.
Yep. So with the warrior mindset, how can we use that like in everyday life? Now, because obviously, we've talked a little bit about combat and we're trying to put it more towards regular life. But how can we use that just in everyday life, a warrior mindset? Do you have any examples or maybe just any thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's a good question. I mean, obviously, we've already talking about, you're going to experience challenges and, you're going to have setbacks, and then you got to have the self-talk and the resiliency to force your way through those. I mean, you do really have to impose your will on these things. I mean, that's really what it is. It's just being stubborn enough to keep going until the dam breaks, right?
Yeah.
But I think there needs to be a component. I guess maybe I'm misunderstanding your question, but it's like, how do we train that in ourselves, right?
Exactly. I think that's what I'm getting to. For our listeners, how do you use a warrior's mindset just in everyday life?
I think there's a number of ways to do it, but I can only tell you the way I do it. So,
absolutely.
For me, like the training that we do with our training company, right? So it deals with, self-protection. So it has everything from, firearms, combatives, all that kind of stuff. But to me, that's where my life lessons are, right? So there you need, I think, to have some type of activity that you're pursuing that is both physical and mental, right? It has to pull them both together, right? So it's not good enough to just get a skill. Like, for instance, I don't play golf. I've played a few times and it's disastrous every time, but I'll still go out with my buddies sometimes because they enjoy it and I like hanging out with them. But I know that there's life lessons in golf, right? That I've heard people talk about that are very poignant, right? But the problem is, I mean, for me, why I don't pursue that is because, okay, there's a skill component there that teaches you, focus, concentration, taking other factors like wind and weather, when you're trying to send this ball down that, right? So you get those life lessons about patience and, all those kinds of things. But for me, it's got the mental part of it and it's got the skill part of it, but it doesn't have the physical component. It doesn't have the pain that's to it. So to me, it's you need to pursue something if you're capable of doing it. Some people have disabilities, but to your best ability is to find something that marries a physical component with a mental component to it. So for instance, like just about any type of endurance sport or activity will have that. So like, I'm an Army guy, so ruck marching, right? Ruck. Loading up a ruck with 45, 50 pounds, that's a lot for some people. It's not a lot for military dudes, but
Right.
it's kind of, the standard load, right, is 35 to 45 pounds, right? And of course, if you go on deployment and you're going on a patrol or something, I assure you will have much more than that.
I'm sure you do, yes.
But when you're doing, just like rucks, with your unit or timed rucks or whatever, 35, 45 pounds, right? And if you've never rucked before, you obviously need to work up to that, right?
Right.
If you're not, like, for instance, if you're not a walker or runner, you don't need to be putting 45 pounds on your back and then going out the door.
Focus on walking first and then get yourself up there. Yeah.
Yeah. But I know, like, you go on a 12-mile ruck, and let's say you want to do a 12-mile ruck in 3 hours, right? That's not a small feat, for most people. That's a 15-minute mile. That's you're cooking, right? But during that time, man, in that 12 miles, it's just you and the dirt. It's just you and that road. And for that 3 hours, you are going through some things. You're going to be hurting, if it's 30 degrees in a
Yeah.
rainstorm, like sometimes I've been, you're combating the elements. And so you're having to not only have the physical acumen to get yourself to the finish line, but there's a mental game that you're playing with yourself, right? And so from there, you're taking those lessons that you're learning through that activity, and those are what's, I think, is a way to not build a resume, but to build a reserve of successes, of lessons and experiences that then you can take and apply to your life. And that's
Yeah.
one example, but there's
Sure.
many other things. You don't have to be ruck marching, but I think there needs to be, if you're truly going to be on this path, there needs to be that, if you're going to be on the warrior path, I think you need to pursue some type of warrior pursuit. I think, whether it's martial arts, combatives, MMA, something like that, that is physical, but then also has a mental component,
Right.
to
You
it.
got to think. You can't just
Yeah.
throw your arms around willy-nilly and hope something lands. You got
Yeah.
to have
And,
a strategic way of, getting in.
yeah.
Like I'm thinking MMA because it's the last thing you said, but you have to have a strategic thought about, okay, am I going to shoot? Am I going to punch? Am I going to kick? What's he doing to
Yeah.
me? How do I defend? Yeah.
Yeah.
You got a ton of stuff going on there. Plus you're on your feet, not only trying to, how am I going to defend, but how am I going to attack?
Yeah, exactly. And so, and then obviously those are things you tend to do with other people. So then you're building camaraderie, you're building relationships, and those too have value that you can apply into other areas of your life. In an MMA or jiu-jitsu situation, that those are great because those are relatively safe things that you could pursue that you can really go all out on. Like if you're
Really? Yeah.
rolling on the mat with somebody, especially someone who's better than you, that knows you, that is not going to hurt you, that you're in, again, the camaraderie, right? So they're there to help you become better. Is you can go all out, right? You can go full exertion out without really hurting yourself or hurting the other person. And then you learn your own limitations, right? You
Right.
learn like how, like if I get locked into a chokehold, like how long,
Yeah. How long can I last?
yeah. And so you learn, you're in an uncomfortable situation. You're being choked out, and it's like,
Exactly.
can I move the stress and move my neck in such a way that I can still keep in it and maybe surpass this, right? And
Exactly.
overcome this. And you learn those things. But I think those are examples like that come top of mind, that there's some training component to it,
Mhm.
right? And it's healthy for you, it's good for you physically, and it's good for you mentally. And those are things that you can definitely take to your everyday life, in the
Yeah.
room, at the office, on the job site, wherever.
Yep. And now you own is it a tactical training company?
Yeah, I do. It's really, I call it a security training and consulting company because
Okay.
we do consultation too, like, training security teams, doing site audits and
Mhm.
inspections, and that part. But then there's also the tactical part. I mean, we do stuff with the military and law enforcement and even security minded citizens too. Yeah.
Gotcha. So do you do any citizen training like self-defense or anything like
Mm.
that? So okay, so like if like concealed carry practices or things like that. I don't know if your state offers concealed carry, but
It does. It does.
yeah.
I mean, I'm down in the South, so like
So yeah.
everybody's wearing it, whether they've got the permit or not.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
yeah,
You only need a
but
permit if someone sees it.
yeah, yeah. So we don't do the licensing training, like the concealed carry training
Right.
for that, but we definitely do like carbine courses, pistol courses. We have,
So a little bit
yeah,
advanced training.
yeah,
Yeah, outside of that, right? Because I'd have to think too with tactical training like that. Let's just talk about self-defense,
mhm,
firearms training. That's definitely going to have a warrior's mindset
yeah, for sure, for
because you're
sure.
doing your skill, right? You want to keep your shots on target. You want to make sure you're safe. If you're doing a self-defense situation, I'm sure you teach this to everybody, but where am I? What type
Yeah,
of environment am I
yeah,
in? Where's my, bullet going to go? These are all things that you have to consider when, doing
yeah,
those things. So I can see
yeah,
how that would lead to a warrior's mindset
yeah.
as well.
Yeah, so we'll do that, and we'll even do kind of seminar-based classes like situational awareness kind of
Nice.
classes, spatial awareness, things like that, how to
Hmm.
kind of how to kind of run your mind, right? Utilize your mind as a defensive tool, right? Yeah. And so there's a lot of folks, probably even the majority that come to us, for three reasons, right? Number one, they're interested in self-defense. They want to get better with this gun. All right. So, and then we've got the folks that come to us they're interested in self-defense, but they've also taken this up as a hobby. They just enjoy it because,
Right.
they'd rather be on the gun range than at the golf range. Right. So,
Mhm.
which is fine. And then there's probably like that third tier that is all reasons 1 and 2, but then are kind of on this warrior path. So, and that's kind of one of the reasons why I made the podcast. I mean, we do tactical topics like I've got one on there for low light,
Mhm.
encounters. I've got stuff on ballistics, and long range shooting and, all that kind of how dry fire, how to level up your dry fire practice. But then there's also those, I guess, metaphysical, like esoteric kind of topics that are more geared for like, where we kind of peel apart or pull back the curtain on like studying some of these ancient warrior cultures and like what were the values that they had, what was important to them, how did they prepare themselves to go into a kill zone, basically, like preparing themselves for death. Because I mean, whether you're in the military or law enforcement or not, there's one thing we all got in common, that we're all going to meet death,
Yes,
so how do
it's a
you
guarantee.
yeah, so how are you preparing for that? And for me, these arts, right, these warrior arts are the way that I'm preparing myself not only for death, but how I want to live a fulfilled life. There's a path for that. And so again, you don't have to pursue that exact modality to reach that, but that's the way I've been doing it since I, was a kid and I first
Mhm.
enlisted. And, and then the folks that come to us, there's a group that want that. And so that's the medium we use to try to provide that experience and to coach those people along.
I like that. And just for our listeners, that's the Pearl Snap Tactical podcast, right,
Yeah,
Mark?
World Snap Tactical Podcast. Yeah, and if they go onto our website, we run it on a Substack page, but it's free. You can sign up for free. There's also subscription memberships for members, content only. But yeah, most of it you can get access to it for free. And then there's also a list of events for like when we do live events around the country that if we're in your area and you want to come out, you can come out and hang out with us and train with us.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that would be a good natural next step for the listeners of this show because we've just touched the surface of the warrior mindset. But I
Yeah.
think if they could go over to your podcast, Pearl Snap Tactical, they could get in even more in-depth episodes that you have.
Yeah.
And I think that's great. So
Yeah.
do you have anything new coming up or anything that you want the audience to know about?
So, I mean, yeah, I mean, we're kind of at the time of this recording, we're coming out of the winter cycle and we're kind of getting close to spring. So we're kicking off our training season. So we'll be in multiple states, around the country. And then so that's always an opportunity if people are interested in that stuff. The podcast is something that I've had the podcast for a couple years, but I didn't really get intentional about it until last fall, right? So now I've
Gotcha.
been putting like 2 episodes out a week.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I'm kind of on a consistent op tempo, and I have been for a while. I think I finally figured out, how to be consistent. That was my
Yeah.
biggest challenge
That's
for
one
a
of the
while.
toughest things for a
It's
podcast,
hard.
isn't it?
Yeah, it's
Consistency.
really it's
Because you, like me, we're all doing this is not how we make money. This is
right.
not
Yeah,
our bread and
exactly.
butter by any means.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it's a lot of work to go in. Plus you're putting in probably 60, 70 hours in another job. It's a
yeah.
lot.
Yeah, so yeah, it's but I finally kind of figured that it finally cracked that nut. So yeah, those are the new things. I mean, this last season I started having guests. So first it was, me and my business partner, a guy who was in Ranger Battalion, had a lot of great knowledge that he was on there for a while, but then he's now just life changes, he got married, had kids. He's kind of in a different so he's not on there as much. So I'll do some solo episodes, but I started having more guests on. So we've had some I had Tim Larkin on there. That guy was on Joe
Nice.
Rogan's
Yeah.
podcast. So he's a big, like, empty hand combatives kind of guy, a guy very popular in that space, and some other dudes that, people that if they're interested in that, they may have heard of. Yeah. So there's stuff I try to kind of do a pretty wide variety of topics, from like the tactical stuff to kind of the warrior philosophy stuff to the just even the not politics, but just geopolitical stuff. Like, so I'm not talking head stuff, but just talking about like the security standpoint of what kind of threats are here, domestically.
Exactly. Yep.
What about overseas, terrorism, insurgencies, and things like that, and how that stuff finds its way home. So some of that. So I'm an infantry guy, but I also had an intelligence background. So I kind of draw on that. But then I also have guests who are like, that's all they do. And so they're better versed in it than I am. So I try to bring them on so that we can kind of get their brain, on it. So
get some different views and different perspectives.
Yeah. And so there's quite a bit of that. So I think just about, if you're interested in any, that's a pretty big, wide swath of topics, but I think there's going to be something. I mean, if they're interested in watching your show, I'm pretty sure they're going to.
Yeah, I think, if you're watching Just a Dude podcast, I think you're going to like Pearl Snap Tactical podcast. So get over there, definitely give Mark a listen. Subscribe to his podcast, subscribe to mine if you haven't already. But yeah, I think, and this is why I had Mark on the show, was because I knew him and I have similar backgrounds, not the same. Mark was an infantryman in the military. I was a police officer for 13 years. So we have similar trainings, but different locales, right?
Yeah,
so
sure.
It is, but no, it's definitely good to hear about the warrior mindset. It's something that, I've always been interested in, just from a training standpoint and things that I've done in my past. And I'm so glad that you decided to come on. I appreciate it for real. But Mark, is there anything else you want the guests to know? Or I'm not the guest, you're the guest, but
Oh man, I just really appreciate you having me on. And if people like this topic that we're talking about, we definitely cover that and way more on our podcast. So would love to have you come over and hang out with us over on our podcast page, and drop me a line. Let me know what you think about the show. I'd love to hear from you.
So everybody that's listening knows that you can go to justadudepodcast.com, and Mark will have a guest spot there, and all his websites and information will be there. That brings us to the end of another enlightening episode of Just a Dude Podcast. I want to extend a huge thank you to Mark for joining us today. Mark, your insights into the warrior mindset have not only been educational, but also incredibly inspiring. It's clear that the principles you shared aren't just for those in combat or crisis, but for anyone looking to navigate life's challenges with strength, resilience, and a clear head. Remember, cultivating a warrior mindset is about more than just surviving. It's about thriving in adversity, setting your goals, facing your fears head on, and growing from every experience. Whether you're dealing with personal trials, professional hurdles, or just the everyday grind, the lessons from today's conversation can help you stand firm and move forward with purpose. If you're interested in learning more from Mark, check out his work at Veritas Defense. There, you'll find a wealth of resources on self-defense and mental preparation. His blog is a treasure trove for anyone looking to delve deeper into the warrior's path. Don't forget to subscribe to Just a Dude Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We're here every week bringing you stories and insights from people who've mastered their craft, their minds, or their lives in unique ways. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review or share it with someone that could use a dose of mental fortitude. For more content, don't forget to follow us on social media. We're on all major platforms. There we can keep the conversation going. And if you have questions, comments, or want to suggest a guest or topic for our show, hit us up there or at our email, which you can find on our website, justadudepodcast.com. Until the next episode, keep pushing your limits, keep learning, and remember, in the face of life's battles, your greatest weapon is your mind. Stay strong, stay resilient, and keep that warrior spirit alive. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time on Just a Dude Podcast.